Today, like Father said, the church celebrates St. Charles Barromeo, who was born into a wealthy family and had an uncle who became Pope. St. Charles lived at a time of the Protestant Reformation and was heavily involved in the Council of Trent. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about our gospel today, where Jesus gives us a parable of the dishonest steward, which is probably one of the most confusing stories Jesus ever told, because it seems to some that he's praising a crooked business manager's deception and the violation of the "thou shalt not steal" commandment. But that's not what Jesus is doing, because the nature of loans and stewardship in those ancient days was much different than they are today. For example, when I was working in the business world, years ago, there was a computer technician that came to my office to put an update on my computer. And while she was in the middle of it, something went wrong and she dropped out of the server. And so she tried to log back in and couldn't get in. So she tried and tried, but then she said, well, I'll have to come back later. I'm going to go back to my office to see what's going on. So on her way back to the office, when she got there, she was met by one of the managers there who let her know that she was being terminated. And then the security people took her badge and the building keys and her ID card and escorted her out of the building. The same scenario kind of was repeated at Twitter headquarters this past week when billionaire Elon Musk took over the company and fired some of the managers there. They took away all their credentials and kind of suddenly just brought them out of the building. So knowing all that in the modern business world like that, I imagine there's a lot of people that when they can't log into their computer for some reason, they wonder if somebody's going to show up and fire them or something. But in the case of the parable today, the master lets the steward know that he's about to be fired and then tells him to conduct his own audit of the books before leaving the job, which is weird, right? Well, not in those days, because stewards back then lived off commission. And this guy's firing was probably because of the result of him trying to maximize his profits by tacking on big commissions and obligating too much of his master's property to clients that maybe had risky credit, instead of using those products to use for more profit for the master. So when the steward calls in the debtors, with the example of the one who owed 100 measures of olive oil and then reduced it to 50 measures, the steward was probably not stealing, but instead he was almost assuredly eliminating most of or even all of his profits or commissions. And that's what Jesus said was calling him rightly a wise and prudent steward, because he chose to give up material things in favor of forming relationships that would last and benefit him in the long run. So what Jesus is really trying to teach us in this parable is that God has given us a tremendous amount of gifts that we've profited from and have done real well in this world with. He's given us physical abilities to work, our brains to think with, our families and friends to support us, and so many other blessings that we've profited from and made pretty good commissions. But the big question is, have we been using the master's property, i.e., our God-given gifts, to build up his kingdom or our own? Jesus gives us this parable to help us see that it won't be that long before our stewardship of God's property will be coming to an end, and we need to prepare an account of our stewardship. And if we find that we've been selfishly squandering his gifts in this world on ourselves up till now, he wants us, like the steward in the gospel, to start sacrificing and those commissions and our talents and our treasure and our time for the good of others, as an eternal retirement investment for when our stewardship ends. In other words, Jesus is telling us that if we don't want to do the right thing simply because it's the right thing, or if we don't want to love others just because we have a good Christian heart, then at least we should do it because it's for our eternal best interest. Because like the steward in the parable, we are now facing or being faced with a choice between keeping our profits or saving our eternal lives. Jesus is quite clear in all the Gospels that what we do or don't do to the least of our brothers, we do or don't do for Jesus. And we can't take our money with us, our possessions or our profits. We can't take them out of this world with us, because it kind of works the way because they won't fit through the eye of a needle or the narrow gate entering heaven. Only our acts of love will. Then if all this wasn't enough, Jesus in this gospel, he gives us another head scratcher at the end of the gospel when he says, the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. And what he's talking about there is that worldly people make more sense than Christian believers do when it comes to making choices about their future survival. For example, when business owners realize that a certain practice or product is losing them money, they fix it or they eliminate it right away. They know that in order to survive, they have to cut their losses, otherwise they'll end up in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But for us Christians who know that certain things are losing us God's grace, we seldom act in such a decisive or intelligent manner. Because even though we repent as to eternal bankruptcy, we still don't fix shrewd ourselves in this world in our eternal